For this session, it comprises myself and Ian Tindall, who's the chairperson of the Central Adelaide Local Health Network. Ian couldn't be with us today. So what we did was we pre-recorded this the other day. Once it stops, I'll still be here probably to just summarise and take as many questions as possible. Given the nature of the topic, which is making your HREC fit for purpose, we have heard in the last couple of days about the role of lay people and the value of lived experience. And later on today, in the final session, Kylie Sproston, who's the CEO of Bellbury Limited, will be talking about capability and capacity in HRECs. So I'm very hopeful that this will be consistent with Kylie's views, but if it's not, it's just a view, and feel free to challenge, add, subtract, or disagree in any way you see fit. So I think, Sarah, if you would care to roll the video, and I think it goes for about 35 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes after that to summarise.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on making your HREC fit for purpose. I'm here on the land of the Kaurna people in Adelaide, recording this with Ian Tindall, chair of the Central Adelaide Local Health Network Ethics Committee. And we are going to talk about today making your HREC fit for purpose. So I think this session, we want to largely have a discussion. We have a number of topics we want to discuss. And then I will be live in the on Zoom afterwards, so that you as the audience can actually ask more questions should you wish. But I think what we've thought is we will do this kind of workshop, which will be a bit interactive. And I think these are the topics that we think are rather important for HREC members to understand and know, and even coordinators as well, and also researchers. So what I will do first is just share our screen. Well, actually, Ian, you may introduce yourself. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your HREC experience?
Well, I'm just old, Gordon. Been around a long time, 30 years chairing and vice chairing and HRECs, and pharmacist by profession. And 20 years ago, we started Bellbury, which was the first private ethics committee in Australia. And 5 years ago, I was approached to head up this committee in the government here. And so now I'm the chair of Callan HREC, which is about 80% of Adelaide's medical research effort. So it's a professionalised job. So I'm virtually a full-time professional chair. As ethics is a business, now we're approaching this in a business-like manner. So I'm sort of doing it for a living.
Well, I'm a comparative newbie. I only have 9 years under my belt, so not near the 20. In actual fact, that's one of the issues we maybe want to deal with. How long should a person be a chairperson of an ethics committee? Yeah. I know I have a view in that, and maybe other members do, but I guess as long as you're adding value, that's what we want. Okay, on to the meat and potatoes of the event. And let me share my screen here, because I think what we need to do is, well, you know who we are now, making your HREC fit for purpose. And that's what we want to talk about. And really, we would like some audience interaction. So I think towards the end of it, when I'm there on my own, if there are questions you wish to ask, please feel free. It's a great opportunity, I think, to talk about things that maybe you don't get the opportunity to talk about. Okay, so next, what we then want to do is tell you what we're going to talk about now. And these are the topics we thought would be useful for discussion today. So the quality of decision making and the role of the chairperson. And you can see them, and I won't read them out. But what we'll do, Ian, we'll go through them one by one. We'll take about 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, and see if we get through them all. And then for the sake of everyone online who doesn't want to listen to us droning on, we'll probably stop there. But Ian, let me start by asking you, in your experience as an ethics committee chairperson, one of the hardest things is to judge the quality of decision making. How do you get to that consistent quality decision making?
Well, I think it comes down to the quality of the members, really, and encouraging discussion during the meeting. I think the way I do it is the point and pounce. No member can sit there and do nothing. They all get, obviously there's dynamics in the meeting where sometimes there's a power structure in the meeting and various people feel, oh, well, I can't bring something up because someone's got a different opinion and they're more knowledgeable than me, in italics. So I discourage that sort of thinking. So everyone has an opinion, from layperson to clinician. Everyone has an opinion, and I expect them to give an opinion, and then we come to a consensus. But like in government, once we make a consensus, then we all support the decision. But we certainly have some passionate people on our committees, which most HRECs have, but we try and get a consensus on decision making. But I think it's encouraging discussion is the thing, and this was probably during COVID when we couldn't actually see body language. So I'm a great believer in body language. So I can see someone sitting there with their arms folded and they say, "Oh, I'm happy." I realise that they're not happy, and so you need to probe a bit as a chair and find out what the problem is, and then get the discussion going. But then the discussion doesn't need to go on forever. The art is to of chairing, if you like, is to gather it together and then call an end to it.
So good point. And I mean, people do have views, and ultimately every ethics committee comprises that expertise that all have their own views. And you don't always have to agree with the decision, do you?
No. In fact, I've had meetings where the feeling of the meeting is very strong about something, but I've disagreed. However, that's the feeling of the meeting, then I'm obliged to support that going onwards. And if that's the consensus and the feeling of the meeting, I've had some decisions like that where some members are really passionate about things and say, "No, this is what we want." That's fine. And then afterwards, it's I support that decision.
And my own opinion, and bearing in mind this is just a view, is that as Einstein said, or I think it was Einstein said, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And what I found remarkably humbling about chairing ethics committees is the fact that the other members know so much more than I do. And a lot of it is has been, at least in the when I started at the university ethics committee, was in a field of research that I wasn't familiar with. So I had to go back to the principles of the national statement to try and assimilate everything, but I leaned heavily on the knowledge of members. But that's not to say that those members shouldn't be challenged on their views. So important that if someone has a view, that's fine. But as a chairperson, I think, do you agree we would actually have to challenge that to see what the substance of that view is?
To give an example, Gordon, we had a HIV drug we were discussing, and one of the lay people brought up about the patient sheet, information sheet. Well, what if that's less in the share house or something with a title on it? Other people would know that you've got HIV, you see. So we went back to research. Everyone said, "Well, that's a good question. We didn't think of that." So we went back to the research and we said, "That's a really good question. Who asked that, by the way?" And we said, "Well, that was the layperson." So that's the beauty of diversity on committees, Gordon, that you can get some really interesting questions that, as a scientist, you wouldn't think of asking. You assume stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's the beauty of diversity on the committee. I think it's important that committees be diverse, which is a strength in my view.
So maybe to summarise, then, so the role of talking about the role of the chairperson. What do you think are the key? What's the three key points in terms of the role of the chairperson that you suggest?
I think it's to have fun during meetings, right? So they're not really serious. Have fun, have some laughter, but in the end, you're here to do a job, and the chair needs to grip up discussion and make sure it doesn't go on too long. So I'm very conscious that members have commitments, and you've got to make sure the meeting's properly chaired and steered, and then decisions are made most of the time if possible when you come to a consensus. So the chair is like the captain of the boat, if you like, or the first amongst equals. I think is a good thing, like cabinet. So the chair is the first amongst equals. Everyone is equal, but you're the first. So
interesting. So what do you think then about the captain's call? So let's just say, for example, you have a situation where your members or your reviewers have a different opinion from you as the chairperson, from a chairperson. Do you think it's appropriate for the chairperson to make a captain's call when your primary and secondary reviewers don't necessarily support that view?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Here I'm the technical chair, so I'm the primary reviewer for every study, so it's easy. I'm the primary reviewer.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. That's why I'm point A, which is it's a full-time job, point A. So I'm the primary reviewer for every study. But I have seen that where again, some members are very passionate about something, so often we'll take that offline and say, "Look, let's not discuss it in the meeting. Let's have a subcommittee, or let's get the researcher in and say, these are the concerns of my members. What can we do about it?" Usually we come to a consensus. So we have never rejected any study at all, Gordon. We've always come to a consensus about something to get it through. Like our job here at Callan is to facilitate research. That's the primary job of especially a professional HREC, is to facilitate research. You're not here to get in the way, muck around, be obstinate. Your job is to facilitate research, right? Now, that doesn't mean you're a rubber stamp, that you allow anything through. We have high standards of research. So we're not a rubber stamp, but we're here to facilitate research. So we'll get it through one way or another.
And would you agree? And I mean, ultimately, it does come down to what the participant wants. No matter what we do as an ethics committee, ultimately, if the participant wants to participate in something, why would we stand in the way?
Absolutely. We've had the phase ones where it's quite a risky study, a lot of comorbidities, but in the end, Gordon, it's the participant can sign or not. If they're put we've had experimental COVID vaccines and very little knowledge about that. In the end, it's the participant who has to sign and say, yep, I'm happy. They're all the things we don't know. What do you think? Some people are still going.
So then, just to summarise, then the role of the chairperson, maybe creating the right environment, facilitating discussion, and perhaps achieving consensus.
Yep.
I think you have 3 good points there.
And having a bit of a laugh.
I think fun, fun is underrated. Absolutely.
Make meetings fun, so that they're not people want to come to a HREC meeting, right? And most of my members, it's a lot of fun. We have a good laugh sometimes.
And I think you can do that if you don't assume you know everything.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Okay, and number 2, structuring your HREC appropriately. Now, there are differences here in HRECs because we have hospital HRECs, we have university HRECs. We might deal with them later on, but in terms of structuring it, what approach have you taken to getting your ethics committee in the way you want it?
The problem is, Gordon, the national statement of guidance is very, not poor, but low, right?
5.1.30.
So you have a minimum set, but it's not fit for purpose, right, for most technical HRECs. So as I said, I like diversity. So we have about 15 members on each. It's one committee we divide into 2, so 30 members, 15 on each. Now the idea is so that meetings don't go on all day. We have twice a month meetings to turn things around. But I think you need a good mix. So we have lay people, we have clinicians, we have nurse practitioners, for instance, who are very cold-faced people. You need a mixture of academics and cold-faced people to answer those cold-faced questions. So, and we try and gender equal, but sometimes it's not achievable. But we do have an emphasis on people that have had exposure to research. Now, sometimes that's not always possible. So we have lawyers, but they have had exposure to research or privacy or consent or something like that. I think that's trying to get, and as I said, I recruit everybody on my committees because I know people have had it, and I'll come across and say, gee, you'd be a good member on my committee, and they'll tell me to rack off sometimes, but other times they'll say, oh, I always wanted to do that. How do I do it? I said, right, come with me. So I try and get people who've had exposure to research, like been in that sort of environment, because then they know what to expect. But that's for lay people, obviously that's not possible. But so yeah, I think you need to, and people that are willing to work with other people, I think as well. That's why I recruit personally, because some people will not work with other people and want to die in the ditch over some decision. So you need people that are prepared to compromise a bit, right? This is all about sometimes, well, look, I'm not happy, but I'm prepared. If the other members think that's good, then I'm prepared to go with it. So, yep.
I mean, look, everyone has a personality. Yep. It's just a question of knowing which
absolutely. And I've got some passionate members on my committees, but in the end, they say, look, Ian, if the rest of the committee is happy, I'm happy. I'm not going to die in ditch over it, right? So you need people that are prepared to compromise and work with other people.
And similarly, Ian, when I ran the hospital committee, Rob was in that committee, we had about 40 to 45 members. And like yourself, we had two sort of cohorts, although we only had one meeting a month. But that worked really well because it gives you flexibility. The one thing I did do, though, was I went, okay, what applications do we get? What skills do we need? And I wanted to make sure we had overlapping skills. So, for example, if we were going to review clinical trials, I'd want to know we had at least 3 members that have done clinical trials, because on any particular given time when one wasn't there, that was appropriate. And interesting, you mentioned the lawyer. What are your thoughts about, I think you sort of mentioned this, but maybe to reiterate, the skills of a lawyer, because, just because you are a lawyer, and I am a lawyer, in fact, but I don't practice, doesn't mean I have a lot of knowledge about areas of contract law, for example. Not that would be useful on an ethics committee.
One of our lawyers is a privacy, does privacy review.
Very handy.
And so that's very handy, as you say. Now, they're not giving advice on behalf of SA Health, they're just there to advise on the privacy. But certainly the lawyers I pick have had some exposure to like international law or ethics or something like that. As you say, your common garden lawyer is probably not appropriate. You need to, that's why I recruit myself, because I know these people and I know what their experience is.
Very persuasive.
for the $30 an hour they get caught, they laugh. I said, the privacy lawyer, I said, who's Megan Bucks, I said, look, you get at least $30 an hour for SA Health. So I think that membership is important, and I think that's part of the chair's role, is to guide that. Now, sometimes recruitment is external, you can't help that, but I think that's the chair's job, is to mould the committee to make sure it works properly.
And have you come across a situation where you might have to review an application that is outside the expertise of your committee?
I'll tell you, just to go back a bit. So what we do is we give potential members a look in, right? So they come to one meeting, sign the confidentiality clause, because some will walk out after the meeting, oh my God, this is not for me, right? And some will say, yes, this is for me. So I always give them a look in, say, here's a meeting opportunity to sit. If you like it, fine. If not, okay. So that's another way to do it. So you can give them a look in. And the external review, I'm a big believer in that. So I'll often, well, not often, but every now and again, I'll get someone outside the network here to give a technical review of a trial where I've had a bit of controversy, a bit of to and fro. We don't have the expertise on the committee. And years ago, I used to use the one Bill Berry set up, the national committee, which is very good. Things like genetics, all those sort of leading edge things, that's hard to get expertise. And also hard to get expertise that's not coloured. So here in Cal, you can understand the personality differences between investigators, clinicians, that sort of thing. So sometimes you want an absolutely external view from outside just to get the correct view. So,
that's really useful.
So I know what you do.
And well, I think the national statement, of course, provides the opportunity to seek external advice should you choose to.
Yep.
And look, I don't think we'll really get into it about reviewing applications for, I don't know, any group of lived experience people, or any vulnerable group or group with a particular condition, or even First Nations people. I mean, I think admitting when you don't know is actually important, and seeking the right advice when you don't know.
And now the quality standards we have to have, finally the consumer view.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the NCMRC now is encouraging research before you even write your protocol is to speak to the people with lived experience. So getting a consumer view, and so that's different to a layperson on the committee.
Absolutely.
That's going out. Oh, hang on, I'm doing research in rheumatology. Here's the question I want to ask. Hang on, actually, no. The person with lived experience of the disease is telling me, no, that's not the one. I want you to ask this question, which is and having done work for the local motor accident commission, if you like, here, reviewing their protocols, I found exactly that thing. So someone says, no, I don't want to ask that question. I just want a better wheelchair, make that work better. So
there's a bit of a tension there.
Yep,
you can't always get people directing the research, but certainly having that lived experience, I think is crucial. And in actual fact, it's part of research quality. If you want to demonstrate your research is good, this is one way to do it. That you've had not just input, sometimes co-design. And I think let's not get into the nuances of that one, because that could take us a long time. Okay, let's move on to number 3. What training? Training of members. I mean, we know members get induction, but what training do you see as important for?
Well, some members do induction. Well, this is the problem I see in HREC. Some don't get any introduction at all. They just there you go, sit, right?
So learning on
So yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's not good. So what we do here, as I said, they get a look at meetings, so that's one. And then what we do is I do some national statement training with them first. So I go through the national statement. What does it actually mean? That's about an hour and a half. What does it actually mean? And we give them a reviewing template, which is structured around the national statement. So here's a way to structure your review. These are the questions that you might need to prompt yourself, inclusion, exclusion criteria, those sort of things around the national statement. So it gives them a structure for their review. So they don't come along to a meeting having read the protocol. I've got no idea how to ask a question. So they and also we give members Privacy Act training and also radiation training, those sort of things, how to review. The radiation experts come along and give talk. So we encourage training here, And in fact, we've just had completed some training for members on the new quality standards, how that's going to intermesh with research, clinical research and clinical practice. So the members here get lots of training. Now, often we'll do that if we've got a bit of a slow meeting. We haven't had one this year. We have one this week. Well, if you don't do that, then do it separately. And we've had to do some training for members separately, just half an hour, 3/4 an hour, via MS Teams or Zoom, and they can do it a couple of times, so all members get an opportunity. But training is essential for members.
So, a bit of a plug here, but in actual fact, one of my largest bugbears is probably the lack of support for ethics committees in Australia.
Yep.
I'm not saying by the institution, but it happens that this HREC conference is probably one of the few opportunities to hear about contemporary, developments in the area of research ethics. And so, I think coming along to this actually, helps to not just refresh your memory, but to learn new things. But also this kind of session is probably useful.
And we've picked up the new VTech thing in Victoria, which is the new education facility out of Victoria called VTech. So that's like Praxis, but for free. Yeah. So the problem with Praxis wasn't. I've even done the monitoring training for Praxis.
By the way, Praxis is one of our sponsors. So we love you, Praxis. But carry on, Ian, just reminding you.
The monitoring training was excellent that we did for Praxis, but at $800 a member, that's not financially possible, to send people to that.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. So this VTech is coming out of Monash and Melbourne Health, and that's free, which is distributed to various government.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Practice are, of course, a supporter of the conference.
And
have found an area where there is just not enough support. So I think it's such a valuable tool to be able to use, but obviously important that there are options as well.
I think the Praxis monitoring training was excellent, and as I did about 3 other members did the monitoring training was excellent to go and do monitoring, but at a cost. And I mean, SA Health doesn't have a lot of money to throw around.
Well, there's the government help.
I know. Tell me about it. Yeah, absolutely.
And then we'll talk about national statements as well. But in terms of induction of members, what are your thoughts on encouraging them to, not just read a national statement because it could be good bedtime reading, but actually understand it and try and reflect when they're reviewing an application about the use of the national statements.
So part of the training I do, the national statement is I've got scenarios.
Very good.
So this is something that's happened. This is what it means, the national statement. So we go through 2.3.10, part C. What does impractical actually mean, in my view, that you can't get consent?
We can talk about
we'll talk about that later. What does that actually mean? So the national statement will have got various scenarios, and that's why the review is structured around the national statement. So research merit and integrity, well, that's very important. So that's number one. So if you don't think this is going to benefit, say something, right? If you've got qualms about the study, so the template gives them a structured way to review protocols. Yep. And so the lay people, they may not understand science, but they'll look at the patient information sheet, that sort of thing. Would I be in this trial? Would I put my mother in this trial? So they're the questions you ask.
Now, would you agree that in terms of the most important aspects of reviewing, to be a data manager, what someone's going to do with your data and the consent process, including the information sheet, to me, they're the crux of what we do. Would you agree there are two vital topics? And if so, what other topics do you see as essential for members to understand completely?
Well, I think research merit and integrity 1.1 of the national statement is very important, right? And that's, I think committees sometimes overlook that, but that's very important. So what's the merit of the study and beneficence, right? Is there any benefit in this study?
Benefit versus
Now the consent information, the patient information sheet, don't get too hung up on that, because in my view, the patient information sheet is only one part of the consent process. If you go to a consent process, doctor says there's 43-page consent form. Patient says, I'm not going to read that, doctor. Where do I sign? Right? And the doctor will go through it. So we don't get too hung up on patient information sheets here, because there's always this argument of how short do you make them, how long do you make them, what do you put in, what do you leave out. Lawyers will tell you got to put in everything, blah blah blah. So we don't get too hung up. That's our view.
Very good.
That might be a big call, but we don't get too hung up on it.
No, okay. I mean, you know, the lawyer hat on, valid consent, specific informed, we have capacity. There's no coercion. So, but data management, you know, data breaches, what people are doing with their data, essential, and understanding that.
So I like the data management plan. It's a grey box in the national statement. So I'll go through that with a new member. This is the Bible, right? This bit here in the grey box. Who's going to access? And that's very important in this network because only SA Health employees can access patient data here. So that's a problem for universities and outside researchers. So that's very important data management. What happens to your data? But that's nicely summarised in the grey box in the national statement, I think.
Very good. Okay, let's move on to number 4. How much preparation is required?
Yes. Well, I don't know about your members, Gordon, but I insist that they actually have a go at the template beforehand. So don't come to the meeting having not read stuff, because that's really bad. And then that makes they're making decisions on the fly without actually being informed. Now, sometimes they won't understand a lot of what's gone on there, but that can come out of the meeting. But I certainly encourage the template so that they can actually do the work before the meeting and actually read the documents. So that's what your job is, right? Not to come to the meeting cold.
And what would you reckon? Would you expect members to read every application?
Well, no, not at all. In fact, some committees ask them to submit their questions in advance, right? So that proves you've read it and understand it, right? You don't need to read everything. I don't read all the protocol. I know what the red flags are, right? So I know what are the red flags here in this phase 1. Animal studies, tick. You know, so I know what to look for in the red flags department. And most members, that's what the training's all about. National statement, look for the red flags, right? And that means you don't need to read a lot of the stuff. Just have a quick browse.
That's right. I think developing that ability to see what the ethical issues are. And by the way, if we can separate out the ethical issues and the essential ones from the nice to haves, what are the red flags as Ian puts it? Not, I think it would be better if it was phrased this way. That's not important. What's important is what are the ethical issues that we as a committee have to deal with that are prescribed in the national statement. And if we stick to them and keep it essential, then I think we do a service both to participants and researchers.
I agree.
And I think, look, in terms of people reading everything, I think that's hard. If you know,
it is if you're lay. I don't expect to have lay people, and some don't understand the science. I don't expect them to, but the reviewer, primary reviewer, that's me, will give a soldier's 5 out of the study, right? So a quick process is what it is. And sometimes we'll have an expert. In fact, we have, for instance, radiation. We've got a radiation physicist on the committee. He'll give a quick soldier's 5 on what this scan is, what it means, and something. Oh, right, okay, now I understand, right? Or we have a clinician who's an expert on this particular. We've got an anaesthetist who said, "This is the way I do it. You know, this is what happens in theatre." And then the nurse practitioner says, "This is actually what happens in emergency. This is how we do it." So lay members and other members say, "Oh, yeah, right, okay, now I understand what's going on." So it's a bit of it's a teaching and learning experience, Gordon, as well. Callum is very big on teaching and learning. Obviously, we train doctors, pharmacists, nurses, everybody here in the networks and the hospitals. So like that, the committee is the teaching and learning committee. So nobody knows everything, and you know, I learn something every meeting.
Absolutely,
I learn something every meeting.
Important to evolve.
And
improve your understanding. But external expertise.
In fact, our members are so good. The local university borrows them if they're short.
I know.
Well, I think it's a couple of biscuits and a cup of tea. That's all right. That's right.
And we talked about essential versus nice to have. And I'm very big on that because I don't like.
Just to clarify what you mean.
Okay. So essential being what is prescribed by the national statement versus.
I get you.
I think we could improve the methodology, and we haven't talked about whether it's an ethics committee's role to improve methodology. I don't think it is, by the way. But I think it could be better if we did this.
We kind of brings up statistics, Gordon, and about.
I'm not arguing with statistics. Very important. Very important.
Well, that's come down to methodology,
but we're sort of going to move on to the next question because I think we're talking about essential questions versus nice to have. And when we're talking about interactions with researchers, this is actually quite important because, in my view, you can actually speed up the process. Now, that's number 7, so I won't get to that yet. But Ian, what do you think are the essential things in interacting with researchers and investigators?
Okay, so there's before and after. Obviously, they'll ring up and say, "What do you think of this? What should I do here?" Blah, blah, blah. And certainly after, if you've got a list of questions, a request for information, sometimes I'll say, let's have a meeting with the researcher because some of the questions are difficult to put on paper, right? And they may not understand what you're on about. So often we'll have Teams or Zoom, And then I'll say, these are the questions, anything you sort of don't understand. The researcher says, look, I'm not sure about this one. What did you actually mean? Sometimes it's hard to put that in a question. And so, oh, I now understand what you're talking about, right? Things like if you said, look, the patient information sheet it needs to be expressed in lay terms. That to me is a very, very odd question, because the researcher will always say, what do you mean? Which bits, which words, right? So sometimes you've got to come and say, look, we found this word, this phrase to be really difficult, but can you layize that? So I think it helps, and I'm certainly doing this every week, is having meetings with researchers about what our questions mean. So,
I've certainly found that I agree that that's meeting face to face where they can actually explain exactly what's happening makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, we don't have kind of meetings now.
No.
Well,
I don't mind that too much. Beforehand.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think spoken word is a lot easier than the written word. And by the way, I think when you say you have to make that more lay friendly, sometimes though, even though it's technical jargon, if you try and make it easier, it actually makes it more difficult. Sure. So I think sometimes there's a time and a place for just leaving it as is.
As I said, we don't dine with each other and stuff, right? So we just say, look, this phrase was quite obtuse, can you just layize that? Otherwise we're happy, right? As we don't dine with each other and stuff. Some committees will allow principal investigators or researchers to come to the meeting and give their spiel. I'm not really in favour of that. Some meetings, some chairs are, that's fine, but I'm not in favour of it. I think it's a big trap.
I'm quite laid back with it, but I do think that sometimes if you're dealing with subject matter that is potentially outside your realm, or alternatively, if you actually see red flags, which I think could be better dealt with by someone, I'm actually pretty happy to invite someone to the committee. But you know what, the time between the closing date and actually getting the application and getting it reviewed and organising that meeting, someone to come to a meeting, is really difficult. Now, we'll talk about that in terms of speeding up process, but you've got to be very efficient. And I'm not sure about you, Ian, and when you read an application before the meeting, but let's just say I don't read mine 2 weeks before a meeting, I have to say, because I just don't have time.
Yeah, sure. But there is a perception, Gordon, that if a researcher comes to the meeting to speed up the process, I think that's their perception, right? And I'm not sure that's right.
I think it works a number of ways. I think it also shows it's not us and them. I think
it
opens a communication channel where they see that ethics committees are not invisible and hidden behind in a bureaucracy. And I don't like that approach. But talking about interactions, Ian, what about one thing I used to do at the Royal was have these ethics clinics on the Monday and Tuesday morning, so that people, if they wanted, before they submitted an application, could actually come in and say, well, this is what I want to do. Sure. What do you think the ethical issues are? How should I approach it? What do you think?
Well, that's a good idea. In fact, my Wednesdays are spent down at the Basil Kessel Institute in the office there, and often researchers will wander over the road or come downstairs and wander in. At least the secretary and I are both there, so we can ask her. She can do the governance questions, and I can do the ethics questions. I'll tell you, it's well used, Gordon. I'm there having a cup of tea or something. We're trying to send an email, and someone's knocking on the door. Can I see you for a minute? Look, that's what we're there for. As I said, we're here to facilitate research, right? Yeah. So that's how we do it. That's
I see it as it's a win-win. The door is always open unless it's closed.
Well, most of the researchers in 500 researchers got my mobile number, so they often ring me. That's fine. That's my job, right? So some chairs obviously wouldn't do that, but I'm pretty approachable, and I think sometimes they'll just ring me and ask the question. If I can't answer it, I'll put them on to someone.
I think it has significant benefit. I think for researchers, but also clinicians who know the door is open. It really works wonders. I think in the hospital, it improves the research environment, and ultimately, this is about a holistic research environment, not just us and them. And I think we have to address that.
And we ran our research week down the hospital, 1 kilometre down the road, and we get up. The whole secretariat gets up and says, "This is what we do. Here's how we do it. This is how to contact. These are the slides." We have all the researchers there. They can ask questions or approach us later. So we're pretty well open with our discussions. As I said, facilitation is what we're here for. Otherwise, what are we here for?
True. The other thing I think is that if you have this personal interaction,
absolutely.
Even where you actually have to have a hard conversation, it goes down a lot better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They'll ring me up and say, "Oh, Ian, you might say no about this. What do you think?"
No.
The answer is no. You have to change that. So it's a good advice.
And we sort of dealt with this, but maybe we'll just encapsulate this. When you're asking questions of researchers, so we have enthusiastic. You tell me your members are enthusiastic and they want to ask these questions. How do you moderate the questions or get them in the right format for researchers to answer?
So the member will ask a question about something, and I'll say, look, John, that won't make much. That the researcher won't understand what you're asking. Can we, and particularly not lay but expert questions like radiation physicist, he'll put in the questions beforehand. You see, so we get the right form of words.
Decipher them.
Exactly. So the researcher will know what exactly is meant. So sometimes I'll moderate the question and say, look, if we ask that, how's the researcher going to come back? How's he or she going to come back with that? Will that satisfy you? See? And sometimes people will say, no, not really. And so we'll talk about the question. So, and sometimes questions that appear silly are not, and sometimes the questions that appear legitimate, maybe we're going to look a bit strange asking the question. So I think sometimes and as I said, sometimes we'll have a discussion in the meeting, and then I'll approach the member and say, look, you happy with that? That we don't need to ask it? And say, yeah, let's not ask that. So sometimes there's a filter, if you like, put on questions. And we don't ask open-ended questions of researchers, right? So we want bullet point questions, so they know what to answer.
Yeah. And again, I still go in this essential versus nice to have. Okay?
Yep.
And the other format I like using is here's the problem, here's the question. Your information sheet has too much jargon in it, or this sentence. Please change to something that is able to be interpreted by someone of year 8, age 11, or something like that. And the other thing I do in terms of this, when I get the minutes of a meeting, I go through the questions and I go, no, we can't ask it this way. And sometimes I'll just go, no, we're not going to ask this because it's just like window dressing or icing in the cake as opposed to essential. Do you think that's okay for me as a chairperson to?
Oh, absolutely. And Gordon, I'll have some members who haven't read some part of say the patient information sheet. They'll ask, oh, what about this? And Lisa, the secretary, will say, no, it's actually in there. So after we look at the minutes, and we're not going to ask that because it's in there, and we're going to look stupid.
So it's not very good work.
Yeah. So sometimes the secretary, they're a filter as well. So by the time they filter it and I filter it, we've got a perfect set of questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes the researcher will ring up or email and say, look, what did you mean by question 3? And that again may prompt a discussion. So let's have a meeting, obviously, there's something I don't understand. Because as I said, it's difficult in emails and forms of questions in words to sometimes get across what you mean and the flavour of the meeting, right? Sometimes I'll say, the beauty of the discussion forum with the researcher is, look, I can tell them the feeling of the meeting without revealing confidential meeting discussion, of course. I can say the feeling of the meeting was we couldn't see any merit in this.
Absolutely.
You know, the feeling of the meeting.
You don't want to name people.
No.
But if I may say, I think communication is so vital.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it also establishes the credibility of the committee and the ability to work together, you know, to put it in a language that researchers understand. And I think a failure to do that sort of fails to understand the tensions that researchers feel when they're dealing with a committee. So if you keep this open-ended communication and actually have good questions that people can interpret, I think you get a better outcome.
So waiver of consent, for instance, so all the researchers in Callum will know what we want to see in writing for waiver of consent, right? Don't come to us with anything less.
Pretty easy. Give us a form that answers those.
Exactly. Let's up. Just come with 2 points. No, not good enough. So
and so I guess that leads us nicely, Ian, on to number 7, speeding up the process. I'll probably preface this by saying, when I was chairing the Royal Brisbane, we got to a stage where, in large part, we could approve applications at meetings because we'd gone through a process where we, looked at the application early. As soon as it came in, didn't bother waiting for the closing date, sent it out to reviewers, sent back the questions, got the to and fro done so that we had everything we needed by the meeting to approve it. So ultimately we could get it down to whatever that period is, 10 working days, 2 weeks between closing date and meeting, which, you're not going to get better than that. Now, it didn't happen on every occasion, but that was the aim. What strategies do you use to speed up the process?
That's a good question. We're about 30 days phase 2, 3 and above. But phase 1, particularly here in Callum, is tricky because we're dealing with patients with comorbidities. It's not like a simple phase 1 university student 6 capsules, 1 capsule each. We're dealing with cancer patients with comorbidities. So phase 1, we separate out, and that takes as long as it takes, if you like, because we want to be absolutely sure we have a level of risk we will tolerate. That's because we're going. And that's our appetite for risk. And phase 1 takes as long as it takes. But we're still within 40 days of phase 1. But phase 2 and 3, we try and turn over in 30 days. Sometimes it's not the ethics, Gordon, it's the governance that's
It's a really good
Yep.
point because
Yep.
phase one, I absolutely understand. First,
Yep.
first in human or early phase,
Yep.
you really want to get that right.
Yep.
But I kind of think, if you already have the safety data and the efficacy data from, say, phase 1B,
Yep.
phase 2, then when it comes to phase 3, ultimately phase 3 is a bigger study, and you're absolutely right. It's more about the governance than it is about the ethics, because the ethics has been done previously. Any other strategies? Clearly communication is important to speed up the process.
Yeah.
But
so for low risk, for instance, when we see it every week, so we'll do ethics and governance as a package, so we see it as a project rather than separate ethics and governance. So low risk we turn over every week. So, and often, it might take, I think the average is about 2 weeks to approve a low risk study, because we do it as a package. That's difficult to do for higher risk studies, but we try and be as quick as we can. But usually it's the governance that takes the long time, because we're in government, there are processes to go through, excuse me, that are peculiar to government, if you like, that don't occur in the private sector.
Well, that has been the holy grail of review, is getting governance right.
Yep.
I've been involved in this for the last 20 years almost, and we still haven't managed it. And it's a difficult one. But I think certainly as an ethics committee, and noting that this conference is about ethics committees, trying to speed up that process by improving communication, by essentials versus nice to haves, by keeping an open door policy, and all of these things.
Yeah, and just things like having questions in either beforehand and not asking them after the meeting. So
that's my point.
Like you have to assist the secretary board to make it smooth, right? So don't send in the heap of questions after the meeting, because it's gone there, right? It's too late. You need to organise that so you've got the questions ready to go, discussion ready to go, and then it's finished. Yeah. So secretary is having a good secretary is vital. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not sure what you mean, but if I read an application more than 2 weeks in advance, I'm going to forget everything by the time the meeting comes. So, questions are the same. I'd like to get them out straight away.
So we work on. So what do we have? Meeting Thursday. So the meetings come out yesterday, so I've approved. So that's how. So
very
2-3
good.
days.
My previous coordinator was. She would take the next day off. She'd have the minutes ready by that evening. So we had the meeting on the Monday evening. She'd have the minutes ready by the Tuesday afternoon. And then ready to go.
And Lisa templates them, so the minutes are just filled in as you go. And then, because some researchers ring up actually on the day after the meeting, how did it go? So hang on, it just wait a couple of days for the minutes to come out. Yeah, that's right. So wait for your RFI to come. But so 3 days for the minutes basically.
Yeah. So speeding up the process. We've got minutes ready early. Come prepared to the meeting. With questions, and where possible, if you can actually review before the closing date and get the questions to researchers, and then get them reviewed even by the whole committee, but definitely by the reviewers. There's a possibility of getting the application approved at the meeting. And you know what? No one's going to argue with that if you can do that. Governance aside, and we're not here to talk about governance, although we know it's an integral part of the process. Okay. Now, next one, differences in ethics committees, hospital versus university. And we can also say, medical research institute and small institute. What are your thoughts?
So here in Adelaide, the universities, if they want to use Callum patients, they have to come to us first. So the process is there, ethics committee can review it, that's fine, but they're not clinical as such, Gordon. So they come to us to get the clinical feel, and then, so that's the big difference. If you talk about clinical studies, university can review, but we don't accept their review, and they must come to us if they're using Callum patients, Callum data, Callum anything basically. As I said, sometimes we'll supply reviewers to the university because they struggle sometimes to get members. So I'll say, I've got a lay member, give me your contact details. But universities now, with their ethics committees, are tending to go school by school, and they have a layered process. So the psychology school will look at it first, then it comes to the main committee, all sorts of strange ways.
But we don't, so I'm actually a Queensland ethics committee currently, and obviously did the Royal Brisbane. And one of the biggest differences, the university has a much wider breadth of subject matter. At the hospital, largely it's biomedical and then quality assurance or quality improvement. At the university, a lot of psychology, qualitative research. Wonderful if you want to get a handle on how to do qualitative research. But to me, I was like a fish out of water to start with, because it's a bit alien. But and I don't consider myself an expert by any means, but I do understand some of the limitations and the power of qualitative research. But But I take your point about university ethics committees not being able to approve studies where you're going to use public health measures. Yeah. But even if they did, I think there'd still be a hesitation, irrespective of the national mutual acceptance scheme, which isn't national or mutual.
Don't call that anymore.
And don't mention the war.
Three. I think, Gordon, the issue with university committees, obviously, they don't have clinical input, and they don't have the appetite for, they don't know the appetite for risk, right? So it would be no good reviewing a phase 1 or even an early phase 2, because they would not be aware of what our appetite for risk is. That's why they come to us for that.
So this is a generalisation, but I would say I don't think university committees should be reviewing clinical trials. Interventional, and that's a generalisation, but I think you're right about the makeup of the committee and whether or not it's going to be accepted. And certainly at UQ, if the study is going to take place at the hospital, it'll be reviewed by the hospital committee and then come to back to the office at University of Queensland for them to make sure everything's okay. But in large part, I think you do have different membership of a committee. Now you have to meet your categories, but it will be different expertise on a university committee. And in actual fact, as I said, there's a breadth of subject matter one has to deal with.
And there's been a question, well, why does the university bother at all to review it? And sometimes they'll just send it straight to us and they'll accept the calendar review, you see. Now, it's been put to me by some VCs that, hey, actually, we want the university to look at, again, our level of risk or whether we'll do that study. Is that too controversial for that study for us to do as a university? Callan would have no input into that, you see. So there's two separate views. But sometimes they'll just send it straight to us and say, look, we'll accept a Callan review. So they were doing a controversial study into something. The university may not want to do that sort of line of research. They may say, sorry. And Callan would not be aware of it.
Yeah, look, I don't want to get into this right now, but I do think there's a place for, one ethics set up per advanced health research. South Australian one. Or the Health Translation Queensland, for example. Thank you, Health Translation Queensland, wonderful sponsors of this conference. But why don't we have a centralised committee process for the whole of an academic health research centre where you can deal with university stuff and hospital stuff? So just a thought for discussion. Okay, Ian, what is research? So moving on to number 9 now. Ethics committees can often come across studies that maybe don't appear to meet the threshold for research. How do you deal with that? So let's start with low risk research. How do you deal with low risk research in your neck of the woods?
So the issue here, Gordon, is that a lot of people are not aware of whether research is enough. Well, we're not calling research. I look at research and say a protocol and say, is this what we understand by research? Is there a hypothesis? Is there a literature review? Is there statistics?
A research question.
That's right. Is there a question to be answered? And audits, quality assurance, there isn't anything like that in it. But what we want is that we don't want audits and quality assurance masquerading as research and slipping through. So sometimes researchers send us the protocol and say, what do you think? And I'll say, look, I think this is research. If you take this bit out, it then becomes lower. And then you don't have to deal with the ethics committee, you don't have to put it in your annual report. Not that we don't love dealing with them, but it'll be easier for you to do this. But so they're the things I look at and I say, is this what we understand by research? No, it's not. It's just an audit. And audits go on. We do hundreds of those every day in Callan, often for Commonwealth purposes, it's quality assurance, that sort of thing.
So
that's sure, absolutely. Did that patient wait too long? But that's not research. That's not research. And there's a confusion. So they'll say, do we need ethics approval for this survey with patients on how long they waited? I said, no, that's not research. You don't have what we understand.
The really interesting thing is I think the quality assurance and quality improvement and audits, they have ethical implications because sometimes you have.
Okay, well, listen, I just thought we'd stop it there because and apologies for the sort of poor sound quality. I guess that's what happens when you don't have multi-directional microphones. I thought we'd stop it there just because I wanted to leave some time for questions. What I do want to do, though, is just briefly share a screen because just to let you know that there is, I have made a summary of some of the points that came out of this, and I'm happy to share this with you. So we'll leave this on the recording. because I think Ian raised some really, really useful points. And bearing in mind, these are just the views of myself and Ian, and others will have many other views. But there is a summary here in relation to all of those questions, which may be helpful. So I did think some of these questions were very interesting. And, you know, we didn't get to ones such as conflict of interest on ethics committees, professionalization, the use of lived experience subcommittees, and whether we should have one ethics committee per Advanced Health Research Centre. So what I just want to do now is just take the opportunity to answer some of the questions that have been asked. So first one, should an HREC be a private business going forward? And I won't mention any names, but Kylie will be on later on. It's not from Kylie, by the way, it's just referring to Kylie's company. Well, I think that's a great question. I think professionalization is a really important one. And yesterday, we did hear from Jenny about the fact that consumers need to be paid for the services. And really, one of my questions was going to be, should all ethics committee members be paid? If you are going to use people's time to provide reviews, is it more respectful to actually provide payment? And I think the response from yesterday was yes. But, you know, payment is just one aspect. Professionalization is more of a holistic thing. It's not just about payment, it's about everything from, you know, what service you provide to your process to payment. And I think there is a good case for that. I personally believe that an entity such as Health Translation Queensland should have the HREC associated with it, so that applications from all entities within Health Translation Queensland go through that process. What it does, amongst other things, is it has a level of independence that cannot be said to occur for institutional HRECs. Now, you know, just a view, but I think it would certainly obviate some of the concerns around that. So professionalization is certainly an important concept, and I think Kylie will probably talk about that this afternoon in terms of capability and capacity. So next question, there appears to be a push to have less HRECs in New South Wales and generally in New South Wales. Researchers are very unhappy about this. They feel there are roadblocks being placed between them conducting research. By going for a more central model, are you taking away that person link, training and explaining to researchers so they can learn? Look, thank you, anonymous attendee. You wouldn't want to have a centralized model unless it was supported appropriately. Part of the beauty of having institutional HRECs is you can support it. You know who you have to speak to. You go and sit down with the ethics office before you submit your application. You know you have that personal contact. So I think it would be folly just to go from one to the other without a sort of decent change management process. But as we'll hear from this afternoon, Charlotte Allen from the Human Health Research Authority in the UK about their HRECs. And in New Zealand, they have 8 HRECs. We have 195. I think Philomena Horsley yesterday suggested we had 195, and that was in 2000. 195, do we really need that many ethics committees? What about if your ethics committee reviews less than 10 applications per year? Is it worthwhile having it? Why wouldn't you have a large subset of members that could review all the applications, sort of in the way that Bellbury does, but channeled through an entity? I think what's important, and a point that Ian raised, or maybe I raised, I can't actually remember, is that you don't want to be invisible. There has to be an open door to be available, to actually have that relationship where you as a chairperson can actually provide advice on what's required based on your expertise. So I think that, as Ian points out, as the chair of Central Adelaide Local Health Network, he does 80% of the research in South Australia. In WA, I believe they're moving to a single central HREC. New South Wales does not surprise me if they're going the same way. It has to be done with a bit of caution, of course, but also in a way that ensures you have a relationship with the ethics committee and you don't feel, or researchers don't feel, as if they're being marginalized or becoming second-class citizens, for the reason that ethics committees, or human research ethics committees anyway, only exist to facilitate research. If it wasn't research, such as quality assurance, you don't need ethics committees. So we have to maintain that interaction. Hello, Vanessa Druitt. Are you opposed to members who can only attend via online means? You know, Vanessa, we are in a situation now that we have to be able to attend either online or in person. Personally, I don't really mind. As Ian pointed out, I really liked his point about pointing and pouncing and making sure that members actually have a role and can contribute and want to contribute. That can be engendered by creating that environment. But it has been difficult initially through COVID to get the same level of interaction as we had face-to-face, for the very simple reason that you cannot determine people's body language. That said, it is up to the skill of the chairperson to ensure that people are contributing. So I don't mind, and my UQ HREC, we do meet, we have had the opportunity to meet face-to-face, but you know what? I think members actually get used to not meeting face-to-face. And I think Jenny Farley yesterday, in talking about consumer voices, made exactly the same point. It's great to get together face-to-face. So I would favour a system where you actually have some online and some face-to-face, because I think that regular meeting together helps engender trust. It helps you feel as if the environment is more reflective, and that people have done the preparation. So a really good question. And the answer is, I don't mind if it's online or face-to-face, but I'd like a combination. Question from Alison Harwood. The review template Ian mentioned sounds very helpful. Yes, Alison, I totally agree. I'd like to see it myself. I think most HRECs probably have their own templates, which are largely separated into justice, benefit, respect, etc. They should also have an induction template, because it's not just a question of sitting down saying, have you read the national statement? I really liked Ian's points there, and I'll put them up on the slides. Induction is not a static thing. Induction means different things to different people, but ensuring that members are prepared for the meeting is crucial. And of course, you can learn on the job, and of course, you can observe, but having something to help guide you along the way with what you should be looking at, I think, is a really valuable asset. Joel, VC Tech is a new education platform. Thank you, Joel. I must admit, I hadn't actually heard of that until Ian mentioned it. And as I understand, in Victoria, there's a development of training for ethics committee members. So thank you, Joel. Appreciate that. Can you share a list of the red flags to look for? Yes, absolutely. I will ask Ian to do that. And Kate, does ethical approval for phase 1 or 2 trials have impact or set precedents for later phase activities? If so, what are the implications? Okay, there are 2 ethics committees in New South Wales, one of which is Belbury, and I cannot remember the other one, that are certified by New South Wales to approve phase 1 trials. That's New South Wales's approach, but the reason they took that approach is because of the the actual risk associated with some interventional phase 1 studies, principally because these can be first in human studies. So it might be a drug that's been developed in the lab, has been tried on animals, and it has inherent risks. And in my consulting capacity, myself and some colleagues, we provided a review of proposed studies for phase 1 trials. And this is before it goes to an ethics committee, just ensuring aspects such as the pharmacology and toxicology, potentially even pharmacokinetics, have taken place, looking at the animal data, determining what animal models have been used, determining whether or not it's going to be a single ascending dose or multiple ascending dose study. Because if we do not do that with caution, then we can get to a Northwick Park scenario. And for those that know about that, that was a catastrophic clinical trial some years ago. So, Kate, my point about phase 3 was, by that time, a phase 3 is, by that time, you've established the safety of the treatment, the efficacy, you've done the pharmacokinetics, you know what your doses are going to be. That is the point where you really ask your research question. So the phase 0 or phase 1 is going to set the scene for that. And that's where it's crucial to get the dose right. Once you've done that, then you try it in healthy volunteers in phase 2. That will tell you whether or not it's worth going on to phase 3. So the implications or the precedent, well, ethics committees are indemnified. So they always make decisions on behalf of the institute. That said, one should not be making decisions about subject areas where you don't know about. So my point about universities not considering clinical trials is reasonable unless you have the expertise. But once again, if you're involving patients who are in the public health system, realistically, this should be being done by a hospital ethics committee. Okay. When a student researcher, as assessed by responses, appears not to have the necessary supervision, how can that best be addressed? I'm sure many people on this call will be in the same position of being on a university ethics committee and understanding that the researcher hasn't received the appropriate supervision that they potentially should have done from their supervisor. I've been in the situation where we've said, take it back, revise, resubmit. This time, supervisor, make sure you have input. And this isn't a blame game here. It's like, if you're not providing the supervision and guidance, how can we as an ethics committee have any confidence in the research that's going to be conducted? The human research ethics application, by virtue of the fact that it takes people through the questions that would be asked by the national statement, is a wonderful didactic tool to assist researchers to understand the ethical principles. In a way, it is a template to guide them through it. They may not know they're talking about justice, beneficence, respect, and merit and integrity, but by virtue of the questions, they, by answering them, have just achieved that. Realistically, any researchers who want to get involved in research involving humans should not be coming to the ethics committee with an application before they have had some induction or understanding of what they are being asked to do. It's potentially a failing. I'm not saying it's exclusively a failing. It's potentially a failing and is one of probably resources and time. But I think we would all agree, in terms of engendering research quality, ensuring that all aspects of the system are working, be that the knowledge of researchers before they even submit, to the knowledge of ethics committees, to how we conduct and monitor research, is important in the continuum of research to ensure research quality. So Peter, I hope that answers your question. Expediting the study, the last thing we want to do is to go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. As I said, much rather get the questions done before the meeting. If that can't be done in an expedited manner, then potentially one has to involve the supervisor to get them to help the researcher understand, or if they don't understand themselves, for them to understand. It cannot be solely on the student researcher. It's on the supervisor, it's on the institution. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks very much for these explanations. Can you please explain the differences across different networks and how these are integrated? I'm not really sure what that refers to, which of those networks were, so apologies, I can't really answer that one right now. I was really interested in your elaboration of quality assurance versus research and the NLR process. Can you revisit this? Okay, Bridget, very quickly, because we're just running out of time. Research has its own characteristics, generalizable, has a research question, has a good methodology. Quality assurance and evaluation are things that are undertaken to improve research quality a lot of the time within a healthcare setting. If, for example, you want to evaluate your services in a hospital, this isn't research per se. This is part of quality standards. And so there isn't really a research question involved. You may have to consider personal information, but the main thing here is that there are ethical implications. It may not be a research question, but if I want to go and survey patients to see whether or not the service they received was appropriate, it's not research, but there are ethical implications because that is a vulnerable population. So it's wonderful if quality assurance and evaluation projects do have some scrutiny and oversight, A, to determine whether or not they are research, B, to determine whether or not there are ethical implications, and C, to provide advice. So an ethics committee should not review quality assurance because that's not its remit. We review research to determine the ethical issues associated with research. There is a line there. Sometimes it can be grey. I've always said 40% definitely research, 40% definitely not research, 20% in the middle sometime. So when things come to an ethics committee and they are quality assurance, we are happy to provide guidance, but we shouldn't be making a decision on that. Now, okay, change to the next slide. Cheryl, running out of time. So I can't really answer any more questions. Well, clearly I could if we had more time, but I hope that was beneficial. We will make, I'll make the summary slides available, and I will ask Ian for his list of red flags. I hope you enjoyed that session. I'm sorry about the sound quality. Sometimes having two people talking into the same microphone was a bit difficult. Now, Sarah, the next...